right. Well, good day, everyone. We want to welcome you to September, right? Happy September to you. Good day, everyone. My name is Steve Jackson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development and Channel Sales here at PrimePay. And we want to welcome you to our regularly scheduled monthly broker webinars. It's one of our, in our series of our PrimePay Broker Webinar Series that we hold on the first Wednesday of each month, generally. And we know that many of you have so many more competing interests and obligations, and so we're thrilled to have you on board with us today. So we invite you here to a seminar, or webinar here, entitled 10 Important Changes to ACA Reporting. And many of you, I know there were questions here in regard to, hey, I thought this was solely focused on HRAs, and it is to a degree. We're going to dive right into that. But we've got a lot of great content here and felt that we would just broaden a little more of the scope of the talk here today to ensure that we're providing you with as much value and content as we can. We're grateful to have many of you as partners, and many of you actually have attended our webinars in the past, but let me just go through the logistics here of our webinar today. We really covet your questions, and as I go through the content, for those of you that know me, I do try to provide a lot of content, comprehensive content. At the end of the day, we want to bring it to a practical basis. Clearly, because you ultimately need to communicate this information to your clients. So we need to provide you with the technical side of things, but also that practical application. But in the webcast here today, we want to hear from you. And what I'd like you to do is, if you have a question, please go ahead and type it out. Go into the GoToMeeting menu bar to the question box and go ahead and type it in. Now, I will do my best, where appropriate, where I can, to answer those questions, maybe during the webcast if I can. But generally speaking, I'll need to wait until the end of the webinar to maybe review those. Or if the number of questions are so much, then what we'll end up doing is providing an FAQ, certainly to our Broker Concierge partners here after the webinar has been concluded, so that you can see all the questions that were asked and then certainly answered. We are also recording this presentation here today, and the link will be provided on our public YouTube Broker Concierge channel, okay? And so look for that follow-up email to you with the link, but also that link should be generated. We usually try to get it in here by the end of the week, okay? So look for that here over the next couple days. So that should wrap up the logistics. So as you look here at the title slide, all right, in preparation for today's webinar, we certainly have noticed over these last 5 years that the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, has placed us a little bit into a maze, right? We are walking down corridors. We are reading certain guidance and regulations and requirements. We are seeing what the obligations are with employers based on the various statutes and mandates. But a lot of times we're now turning left. We're now turning right. We might hit a dead end, right? And so we have felt very much over these last several years of being kind of in this maze. Now, and many times, though, we do find the answer. We do get to that end result. We do get to some finality with a particular requirement, and we can move on. We can rejoice and then move on. But in the same token, a lot of times, and even today included, a change is being made, and we need to now kind of face that change and be prepared. And so as I was, as I had created this title slide, I actually didn't think of it at the time, but a word jumps out as I had created it, and that's the word change. There kind of in the upper right. Change has a lot of not so great connotations, right, with that word. It can create a lot of agita with employers, with all of us. It can create fear, confusion. It can create opportunities for not doing anything at all, right? Just, I'm not going to even look at that change and even react to that change. But you're sitting, as a benefits broker, you're sitting in a wonderful opportunity to be able to take that change and actually change that to empowerment, to engagement, to understanding. And I'm going to tell you what, a reason why we do this each and every month is to really drive that understanding not only to you, but then also enable you to communicate that to your client. So let's look at these 10 important changes to ACA that have actually, it's kind of propelled us a little further within the maze, okay? And so this webcast here today is really focused on the draft instructions that recently have come out here at the beginning of August for the employer reporting requirements, so forms 1094 and 1095. So as each of you know, the ACA has impacted employers and all of us alike over the last several years. And in the additional requirement that has now hit its preferred timeline within the law is now the reporting requirements for employers. And so this fourth quarter, employers are going to need to ensure that they are going to be able to be compliant with this new law. And if there's one topic, as I've had many conversations with many brokers, many benefit brokers here for the last several weeks and months, the top talk track right now that you're having with employers is centered around the reporting requirements. So some of you might say, well, Steve, you're talking about draft instructions, okay? And I want you to think about something here. Last year, the draft 1094, 1095 instructions came out toward the third week, I think, of July of 2014 for the 2014 return year, okay? The final regulations or the final instructions did not come out until February 8th of 2015. And what the IRS has basically stated is although these are draft instructions where they do seek out public comment and there is some potential for some change, what the IRS has basically stated is that an employer can move forward with the instruction, with the words that are found within these draft instructions. And if it's any consolation from the draft instructions to the final instructions here for the 2014 return year, I'm going to be honest, there's probably not going to be a tremendous amount of changes made, okay? Maybe some further clarifications, but not many changes. So what we thought we would do is focus in on roughly 10 of the, some a little minor, but 10 of the major kind of changes in regard to ACA reporting that the new draft instructions have now pointed out, that they've now basically said, look, we've either clarified some points here or we're changing the game. And so what I decided to do was to do a top 10 David Letterman style. Okay, so we're gonna start with number 10 first and work ourselves down to the number 1 change. And I think as we go along this process, you're going to soon see that this number 1 change is pretty impactful. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So number 10 of the top 10 changes to the draft instructions of 1094, 1095 was, you might say, well, who must file? Well, Steve, who must file? Is that really drastic or dramatic? Well, let's touch on this because there was just some clarification. Over the last several weeks and even months, there's been a lot of conversation with employers and brokers in regard to, an employer who needs to file, but whom should that employer file to, right? So who must file? So an ALE, you're going to see an acronym here that you need to get pretty comfortable with, and that's an applicable large employer, okay, an ALE. So an applicable large employer is generally going to be those employers who must fall, not only under the employer mandate per se, given some transition relief, but would be considered a large employer for reporting purposes. And those are employers that have 50 or more full-time employees and or equivalent employees, okay, generally speaking. So who must file or who must the employer file for, okay? And as you read this definition, they need to submit 1 or more 1094C, that's the transmittal information return for the employer, and file form 1095C, that's the employee statement, for each employee of the employer that was a full-time employee for any month of the calendar year. So they've basically provided some clarification here in regard to full-time employee. So as long as that employee was a full-time employee in any given month of the calendar year, that becomes a reportable item. A statement needs to be not only filed for that employee, but furnished, to that employee as a statement. And so what I just did here was also just reaffirm to you as well, which employers need to file, who are required to file. And as you look at that center column, the applicable large employers, if you are considered an ALE, regardless of whether you're not providing coverage, you offer fully insured medical coverage, okay, through a carrier, or you offer self-insured coverage through you as an employer, as a plan sponsor, as an applicable large employer, you are going to be required to report 1094 and 1095C, period. So there's the further clarification said, listen, any full-time employee in any given month in that calendar year, you will need to report, okay, for that individual and as an employer. Then to the right, again, no changes here in the basic kind of who to file kind of phase. As a small employer, they get some relief. So clearly they're not part of the employer mandate. These are generally employers with fewer than 50 employees. So there is some relief. So clearly if there's no coverage that a small employer is providing, there's no employer reporting, okay? Woohoo, fantastic. They are removed, at least from that requirement. But then it gets a little trickier, right? But there's still some relief if that small employer is offering a fully insured plan through a carrier, right? Through the issuer, through the insurer. And so the employer themselves would not need to report, but now the carrier is actually filing forms 1094, 1095B, part of the B as in boy forms, okay? So then really where it comes to kind of the crux, kind of where everything kind of hits the fan, at least for small employers. So even though they do not have that specific mandate, the employer mandate, and the penalties, A and B penalties that would apply, they still are required to report if they offer self-insured coverage, okay? And so that employer, if they offer self-insured, and I am going to go into some probably stronger detail on this as we get to our number one topic of the day. But self-insured coverage, a small employer will report on 1094 and 1095B. Okay, so very, very important. So that's number 10. Good clarification. It is a. I think that clarifies at least from an employer whom they should be sending these 1095Cs out to. Okay. Number 9. As far as these changes or clarifications made in the draft instructions is reporting other employees. Okay, and so I've used self-insured because self-insured applicable large employers or even small employers, will need to report, right? As I just stated, if you're self-insured, you as an employer are going to need to provide that information on either 1095B if you're a small employer, or certainly 1095C. But I want to speak, I guess, primarily here in regard to applicable large employers. And you have non-full-time employees. Well, you could have an employer that is offering coverage to the variable hour employee base. Okay, it happens, it's out there, and so there was question in regard to, well, am I supposed to be only providing it to my full-time employees? And in the clarification here, an ALE would use 1095C to report the non-full-time employees, okay? Secondly, second bullet point, what about non-employees? Non-employees would be those that would be considered like maybe a non-employee director, okay, a director of the company. Maybe it's a retired employee who, clearly would have been retired in the previous year from that employer. maybe it is a terminated employee who's now receiving COBRA coverage. So they were, terminated maybe employment in the previous year, but they're now a non-employee. So the employer would still be required to utilize 1095-C and provide statements to those individuals, to those non-full-time employees, but also non-employees. And generally speaking here, they would use code 1G, as in George, which is basics, right? Either one is offer of coverage to an employee who is not a full-time employee, of the company. Now, what I did was I went ahead and showed a 1095-C, and this reflects, if you look here on part 2, line 14 and line 16, I just put a kind of an example here where the employer would select 1G as the code. And again, 1G is just saying that you're offering coverage to an employee who was not a full-time employee for any month of the calendar year, so on and so forth. And then you also have 2B, so under line 16, 2B, are those employees just listing from a safe harbor for the employer that the employee was not a full-time employee, okay, there during that time. So this is just to give a perspective. You would, for the self-insured applicable large employers, you would utilize 1095-C, but there is some potential for a small employer, and those small employers that would have non-full-time employees who are receiving coverage or non-employees receiving coverage, they would place that information on 1095-B. Okay, B is in boy. So number 8 in our top 10 list is how to file. So we'll go easy here, right? So as you all are aware, employers are required to file, okay, this return, the transmittal return. That would be that would be on the 1094 forms, either B or C, all right? And that transmittal would be done on 1094. So basically what the IRS has clarified is, well, how are you supposed to file? So the deadlines for filing, if you file manually or by paper, is the end of February, okay, of 2016 for the 2015 plan year or return year. Calendar year, I should say. And then for electronic filing, it would be the end of March, okay, for all electronic filing. Now, if you are an employer that has more than 250 or more returns for the 2015 return year, you will be required to file electronically, okay? But if you have fewer than 250 returns, you are given the option to be able to do that as a paper filing by the end of February or electronically as well. And so just some quick tidbits. So if you do provide paper filing, it needs to be flat mailed. You can't fold it. You must use first class, right? Okay, so real basics. But the main point I wanted to make is on the electronic filing. There has been a publication created specific to the information returns, and that can be found on publication 6156. It's also entitled AIR, A-I-R, that can be used and looked at right now in regard to preparation for that filing. Many third-party vendors, many payroll providers, I'll say PrimePay even specifically, will be filing electronically on behalf of our clients, and so that regardless of size. And so, but other third-party vendors and systems and employers, and depending on how many returns that they have, could either do it manually or certainly on electronic fashion. So number 7, which that kind of leads us to number 7, we were given here earlier this year, the IRS said, you know what, we're going to provide some transition relief in 2015. So the IRS said, well, we are still requiring that all employers furnish a statement to the employees by the end of January and file a return by the end of February or end of March, okay? But they gave some relief in regard to the data, right? Just in case the employer just didn't get it right, perfect, all right? And so they said, listen, employer, if you apply good faith, all right, a good faith effort to get it done timely and accurately, you're good. No penalties have been levied, okay, in regard to, or will be levied to that employer. But what the IRS did provide for in the draft instructions was some extensions and waiver clarification. And so what they stated was for filing, now this is for filing but also for the employee statements, that there is for filing, there is an automatic 30-day extension, and as long as the employer utilizes Form 8809, they would be able to receive an automatic extension. Yes, automatic. They don't have to explain why. They don't have to give a reason code or anything like that. As long as they file Form 8889 by their filing due date, they would be granted that 30 days. Now, that form could also be used in regard to the furnishing of the employee statements, so the 1095 statements, and the maximum extension that could be granted would be 30 days. Now, there's also a waiver if an employer is stating that their preparedness of getting the electronic filing set up in time, maybe they're having issues, technology concerns, it's just problematic. They're not going to be able to get it done in a timely basis. For those employers who are required to electronic file, they did state that a waiver could be granted by using Form 8508, and that form just needs to be provided within 40 days of the due date of the return. So by the end of March is the due date, so you're looking at mid to early February, would be the time that would have to be submitted, okay? So very important. I think that the IRS has stated time and time again that an employer needs to apply good faith effort into ensuring that they get this done timely and accurately. But clearly, under the penalty phase of noncompliance, they clearly have provided some transition relief here for the 2015 return year. So the 98% offer method. So as I think there was a question that had popped up here on the question box, so hopefully we can maybe address this a little bit. We did not want to take all the time in going into every single one of these on a very deep granular basis, but let's provide some good information. There was some clarification in regard to an employer certifying that they fall under the 98% offer method. All right, so if you recall on Form 1094C, there is a section that an employer, it might be line 22, where an employer could state, hey, I offer qualifying coverage and I offer it based on one of these four methods, okay? Now, for an employer selecting or qualifying under one of these methods, it enables them to maybe reduce the amount of data needed for, that would go out to the employees or that they would file or transmit, ultimately to the IRS. So one of these methods was a 98% offer method, and there had been a lot of comment from employers in regard to an employer actually being able to obtain, to reach this particular type of offer. So what is the qualifying offer here? What does this mean? And I've just kind of spelled it out there, as you probably have read. So can you as an employer state that you offered affordable minimum value coverage to at least 98% of its employees? So again, full-time, this is full-time employees for whom it's filing a Form 1095C employee statement, and you also offered minimum essential coverage to dependents, okay? So generally speaking, many employers are going to fit under that definition of affordable, minimum value, minimum essential coverage, right? I mean, generally speaking, but there had been some issues about obtaining kind of that 98% number. And so what they did was to possibly assist employers in reaching that 98%, it clarified the exclusion of employees. So it clarified that you could remove some employees from the count, in order for you to get to that 98%. They said, okay, if you have employees that are within a a limited non-assessment period. So those are those measurement periods. And I just put one example there. You hire a new employee, and they're now in their initial measurement period, and they're going to remain in that period, and you're not going to offer coverage until they've completed that measurement period. So what they've said is that as an employer, you can exclude that specific employee from the count. And this might enable you, if we add up all of those employees who may be in those periods, maybe you can get to that 98%. Now, by achieving or by certifying that you've hit the 98% offer method, it enables you to remove on the second page of Form 1094C, there is on the second page, you're required to list the employee count, the full-time employee count for each and every month of the year. And if you as an employer qualify under the 98% offer method, you actually you're not required to complete, it's column B. I don't have a picture of that up here today, but it's column B of that second page. So, hey, that saves some time, right? So as you look at this 98%, here I just show the first page of 1094C. But as you go down to line 22, there are 4 different methods here. And so what they more specifically, or at least in our research, the one that they provided maybe additional clarification to was the 98% offer method. And this might allow many of your employers to, reach the specific requirements now of the 98% offer method. All right, number 5. All right, as we get to the number 5, midpoint here in our top 10, we now get to multi-employer plan relief. Okay, so multi-employer plan, what are we generally thinking about here? Generally, I would say, as we're thinking about this particular employer, we are talking about an employer who, they're a large employer. They have non-union employees. They provide a health plan to those non-union employees, but they also have a collective bargaining agreement. They have union employees. But instead of the employer paying for the health, managing the health insurance, the medical plan for those union employees, the health plan manages that. There's another entity. There's potentially another reporting entity that those employees would fall under. As you think about the terms for those who need to report, there's a term that is often discussed, a provider of coverage, right? So in an instance where an employer has union and non-union employees, it can be very common that employer is not providing coverage for the union employees. It's the plan, it's the health plan, it's a trust, it's another entity that's actually doing that. So that has caused actually a lot of confusion, because employers are then saying, well, so am I supposed to report them? Do I need to put information on a 1095C? What am I supposed to do? Okay. So what they have clarified, very important, because I know many of you that are on the webcast here today, you've got employer clients that fit under this situation. So for 2015, for this return year only, at least right now, they have provided transitional relief. And what they've said is this, in the first bullet point, very important. Employers qualifying for this relief will not need to obtain eligibility and offer information from multi-employer plans. So what that's stating is that an employer is obligated to report on their full-time employees, right? Or those that have coverage, that they're providing coverage to. But in this case, the employer now is not obligated, and I just show it here in an example here. If you guys are reading some of the things up above, I've entered some Fred Flintstone information. I don't know if that's the correct address, but but hey, it happened like 2 million years ago. I mean, how are you to know? So part 2, the employer would put 1H, which would signify that no offer of coverage was made to that particular employee. And then line 16, they would select 2E, which means that they are under multi-employer interim relief. And as you see here, if an employer has union employees but they're not specifically providing that coverage. The relief has now provided that the employer doesn't need to obtain that information, nor report it here, okay? They do need to reflect it in Part 2. That would be either 1H or 2E, as I have highlighted here, but they would not need to put the covered individual amounts here, okay, under, you know, as we start here in Part 3. So that actually is a very much a welcome relief. So as I stated here in the bullets, and again, you're going to have a copy of the recording and such, so you're going to have this information, but you would enter code 1H, which means no offer of coverage, so that employer did not specifically offer coverage because the plan was being directed by another entity, okay, on line 14, and as long as that employer can use 2E, which is the multi-employer interim relief for line 16. So 2E indicates, as I had stated there before, you know, an employer is required to contribute to a multi-employer plan on behalf of the employee. Okay, so that's basically what that interim relief provides. They have specifically stated that this is only good for 2015 return year. Okay, that it could change in regard to next year, 2016. All right, number 4, a lot of questions here coming around the horn in regard to COBRA. So as we get to our top 4 item here today, we get to COBRA. A lot of confusion with employers. What do we do? What do we do with a former employee, right? So I think I did clarify earlier, talking about a non-employee, that they are reportable, right, on 1095C. Okay, so under COBRA coverage, if they are listed as a former employee, they're going to report that former employee as an offer of coverage, which is 1E, code 1E, on line 14, only if the employee enrolls in that coverage. Okay, so you've got this time period for a qualified beneficiary to determine whether they want to or wish to enroll in COBRA, so they, until they make that selection, then that would determine what that employer would place as far as the code, and certainly report it as an offer of coverage, again, only if the employee enrolls in that coverage. Now, you're going to have several instances as well in regard to just active employees that, due to a status change, a reduction in hours, or something else, but they're still an employee, right, that, that they can still be reportable. And so what the clarification just stated was that you would just report them in the same manner that you use for any other active employee. Are they still considered a full-time employee? Did you offer them coverage? Did they enroll in coverage? Did they waive coverage? Are they not a full-time employee any longer? And so based on that structure is how you would ultimately need to report. Now, keep in mind, if that employee was a full-time employee in any given month of 2015, then a 1095C is going to be necessary for that employee. Okay, so that references from a COBRA coverage aspect, hopefully reduces at least some of the confusion that could be with that. A simple clarification, but I thought it necessary to bring it in. So our top 3 item here for today was allowing employers an ability to maybe simplify how they calculate the employee contribution to the premium, right? So an employer in line 15 of 1095C, they're supposed to put the lowest cost self-only plan, all right? So based on maybe your pay periods, your frequency, maybe, possibly, it's difficult to come up with a monthly amount, because what you're supposed to put there is the monthly amount, the monthly contribution amount. And so what the IRS had clarified then under this is that an employer has been given the opportunity, in order to simplify this, is that they can take the total employee share of the premium for the plan year, divide that by the number of months in that year, and that then equals the monthly employee contribution amount. Okay, so Simple, right? Simple math, but a good clarification, as it did create some confusion and discussion, certainly with employers as far as what exact contribution could be placed there, since we're asking for the monthly amount, okay? All right, number 2 item here is really covering breaks of service, right? You're going to have employees that leave due to FMLA, to other leaves of absence, unpaid leaves of absence, paid leaves of absence. There can be terminations or rehires, right? Employers will rehire that employee. As far as the break-in service there, I mean, you could end up rehiring, that employee certainly at a specific date. And let me actually, Joan, thank you for at least your reminder there. That is on the calendar year, so the number of months is in the calendar year. So you take the total employee share of the premium for the calendar year, divide that by the number of months, 12, right? And to get that amount. So thank you, Joan. Sorry for the confusion there if I caused it. Probably did. Breaks in service. So let's just touch on this here a little bit. Under the break of service, under these rules, we need to treat an employee as an employee through the break if they remained an employee. So think about employer reporting. I need to think about who is an employee, a non-employee, I'm providing coverage, I'm not providing coverage, they're eligible, they're not eligible, and so forth. So if that employee who goes on that break remains an employee through that break, you then just treat them as a regular active employee, as you would generally need to report those employees. However, even unpaid leave, as it was clarified, should be treated as an employee as well for reporting purposes. So really just further clarifications. I think it kind of tidied up a little bit of the questions that were coming out in regard to many of the breaks in service situations. So now we get to the number 1 item, the number 1 key change that we felt was a key change in the draft instructions for 1094 and 1095, and it's centered around supplemental coverage. As many of you know, there's a term that is reflected within the reporting requirements, and they talk about provider of coverage. Are you a provider of coverage? But there's also some terminology in regard to a plan sponsor. Okay, a plan sponsor is someone who is, simple term, sponsoring that plan, responsible for that plan. Right? So when you think about a self-insured medical plan, generally speaking, a plan sponsor is the employer. Okay? Under a fully insured plan, you are generally speaking about a carrier. No, not always. These could be trusts. They could be there could be different types of situations, controlling interests that drive who is the plan sponsor. All right? But what the draft instruction, so as we also think about what employers also offer, they offer other additional supplemental types of coverage, and that could be dental insurance, vision, ancillary types of coverage. But a common, what you would generally call supplemental coverage is an HRA, a health reimbursement arrangement. And so before we get to that specific, with an HRA, as most of you know, employers of all sizes implement an HRA to reimburse maybe a specific set of expenses that could be incurred because of the group health plan that the employer adopts. A lot of times HRAs are established to reimburse deductible incurred expenses, right? Very commonly used. So an HRA, under the definition under the Affordable Care Act, is also considered a group health plan. Okay, so along with a regular, fully insured, self-insured plan, which also needs to conform under ACA, certainly as a group health plan, an HRA is also considered under the definition of a group health plan as well. Okay, so what specifically the draft instructions do is they, instead of speaking to a plan sponsorship aspect, they speak to providers of coverage. okay? And so this supplemental coverage now is, the reporting requirements have now fallen on those who provide coverage, okay? All self-insured types of coverage and so forth. So not required to report are the following. So those types of supplemental coverages that are for government-sponsored programs, Medicare, certainly TRICARE, supplemental, you're still exempt from reporting. Or certainly, as it's stated here, coverage of an individual in more than one plan or program provided by the same plan sponsor. So let's look at some examples just to bring this to light, and it will shed some light there on that last bullet there. So let's give you an example here for a non-applicable large employer here first. So in my example, we have a small employer, so again, generally under 50 full-time employees and equivalents. They offer a fully insured medical plan. All right, this employer also provides at least quote-unquote supplemental coverage through an HRA, a health reimbursement arrangement. Now, this employer also might provide or does provide a health FSA, dental coverage, vision coverage as well. So as we look at this, when I showed you that first summary page of who is supposed to report, I had mentioned that as a small employer, if you offer self-insured, if you're a provider of self-insured coverage, you will be required to report. But a lot of the initial conversation and guidelines were around the medical plan, not the HRA. You know, the HRA is integrated with their major medical plan. So, you don't have to report on the HRA. With these new instructions, it is now pointing towards any provider of coverage, which would point now to the HRA as well. So under the fully insured medical plan for this small employer, the carrier, because they are the provider of coverage for the fully insured, those covered under the fully insured medical plan, the carrier is responsible. They're going to report that under 1095B. All right. They're also going to file a transmittal through 1094B. Okay. What about the HRA? Now, due to the language now stated within the draft instructions, the HRA is now a reportable plan for the small employer, and they must report this information under on 1095B. All right. So the employer will also perform the transmittal as well of 1094B, but they will need to create statements for the employees who are covered under 1095B. Now, what about the health FSA, the dental and vision coverage? All right, still not reportable. That's still ancillary, supplemental. That's exempt. So far, we'll cross fingers. So far from the requirements. So that is not reportable. And then again, I had mentioned on the information return on 1094B, both the employer and the carrier will transmit those information returns on 1094B. Now, what I just showed here is I wanted to at least give you an example of a 1095B, and this is very similar to what it would look like, okay? So this is the current draft copy of the form. They're going to complete parts 1 with the employee information, parts 2 and 3 based on who is providing that coverage, whether it's fully insured through the carrier, part 2, or part 3 through self-insured. And then under part 4 is where that employer, this small employer, is now going to add those covered individuals on the plan and going to state which months where it was that employer covered. Okay, so I just wanted to provide a copy. I thought that would be helpful in regard to at least seeing that. Now, I also want to note, so I put a note here as well. What if the small employer has a self-insured medical plan, so a standard self-insured medical plan benefit, and an HRA? So now, since they have since they're sponsoring 2 plans, okay, provider of coverage, but the plan sponsor of 2, they only need to report on coverage for the self-insured medical plan only. They will not need to provide the coverage under the HRA. So if they are offering a self-insured medical plan benefit and an HRA, they're just going to report on the medical plan, on the self-insured medical plan. And they're going to do what they were supposed to do in the very beginning. They're going to transmit their returns on 1094B and then provide statements or furnish statements to the employees on 1095B. So let's look at a large employer here a second, okay? Because as this applies to small employers, it is now, it's also concurrently going to provide an obligation here to large employers as well. So here is a large employer. They offer a fully insured medical plan. Many employers, a lot of those, right? Many of those employers. They also offer an HRA, so supplemental coverage, including an HRA. This large employer also provides a health FSA. They got dental and vision coverage there as well. So under the fully insured medical plan, as I have, since it is a fully insured plan provided by the carrier would be responsible for coverage information for those employees on 1095B. Okay, so just the one that I just showed you here, the last page. So under the fully insured plan, the employee's coverage information on 1095B. What about the HRA? Okay. Now, because this employer provides they are a provider of coverage, and it's a different plan sponsor because the carrier is providing a fully insured plan. Now the employer is providing a self-insured plan. This large employer is also going to will also need to report coverage information for each employee under the HRA. So the employer, they're already completing 1095C, okay, you have to do that, okay, as a large employer, okay, regardless. But now, because they're offering an HRA, they will now need to complete Part 3, which is the coverage information of those employees on that or those that are eligible for the HRA. All right, so the employer now is responsible for Part 3, whereas the previous instruction stated, they would not need to report. They could leave Part 3 blank if they were offering a fully insured plan. Same things apply here to the health FSA, dental and vision coverage, not reportable. So those are exempt here from the reporting. And then lastly here, the information return, 1094C. This requirement was not removed. And so, there's no additional, that 1094C is still in play. They'll still need to transmit that. I see a common question being asked about HSAs. HSAs are not part of the reporting, okay? So a health savings account, all right? Not the plan. The plan could be a fully insured plan or a self-insured medical plan that is an HSA qualified plan. Clearly, the provider of coverage there will need to report, but the HSAs, yeah, no specific reporting in regard to that. So I also just wanted to show you a 1095C, and again, don't worry so much about the data components necessarily in it, just to provide some examples of what this thing would look like. But under an employer who is offering a fully insured plan and is also offering an HRA, they would make something that looks like this, where they would now need to complete Part 3, as you see below, with the information on those covered employees, spouse, dependents, those covered certainly under that HRA. So I also want you to note also, if this applicable large employer offers a self-insured medical plan and an HRA, what happens? What's really next? So this is similar here to a small employer. This large employer will only need to report on the self-insured medical plan only. Okay, that would be it. All right, so they would not need to worry about coverage information in regard to the HRA. So they would transmit on 1094C, which is what they would do anyway, and then they would furnish statements through 1095C. And again, not just completing sections Parts 1 and 2, but also Part 3, which would be all of the coverage information. But now, instead of the HRA being shown, it is now just going to be reflective on the medical plan itself. So, wow. Was that? I see a ton of questions coming through here, and probably are unable, based on time, to really get through all of them here, at least today. But we need to think about some of these changes, some a lot more benign than others, right? Some of these changes are just basic, and they needed to be clarified, but they are basic information. But I'm going to say right now that you are the trusted advisor for your clients in regarding these reporting requirements. There are certainly many other advisors that your employers and clients utilize, right, from accountants to banking relationships to attorneys and so on and so forth, many of those. But where, who can drive the most impact is actually with you. So I want to just kind of cover maybe just a few next steps, just thinking about where can you go with this. It is kind of hot and heavy here right now in regard to informing clients. You need to be talking to clients right now. They are demanding answers to their questions, because although they see this requirement kind of coming forth, they're just not knowing all the ins and outs of what they need to do here next. So PrimePay will be providing a communication. I did want to let everyone know that we are making a very strong effort in our communication of this important requirement for our clients. And so we will be very comprehensive in getting information out to our clients to let them understand what maybe the new HRA reporting requirement rule, is going to be in place, but also just what is their specific obligation in fulfilling this requirement. But I also believe that this communication needs to come from you, and it needs to come here now. What I'd also discuss is a strategy to facilitate this requirement. As you think about the data, where is the data coming from? I've talked about that, here throughout the year with each of you. Just think about where the data resides. Well, does this particular client have data residing in an HRIS or an HR management system of some kind? Well, if so, that could be more readily available, right? I mean, that's fantastic. But then maybe they don't. A lot of employers do not have such a database of records. So can they get some data from payroll? Yes. Probably, I'm just estimating, but approximately 50% of the data will be coming from payroll. So your employer, you need to understand how your employer interacts with payroll. Hopefully PrimePay could become that payroll provider, certainly, and assist with that information. But you could also get that data, the data that's needed for coverage information is a lot of times going to be found with carriers. Maybe you, as a benefits broker, as an agency, you can assist them because you have that information. But it also could be sitting in spreadsheets or within a filing cabinet, right? And we need to somehow get this accumulated, get it aggregated to be able to deliver it into the forms. And how are you going to assist your clients with that? So efficiency is critical. There are a lot of third-party vendors out there, great technology folks out there that have created some wonderful solutions. And PrimePay, I suppose, is no different, other than we're different because we are a payroll provider, and so we are offering our solution. We are launching this solution where clients will be signing up in the month of October, and we are providing a full-blown kind of launch webinar next Wednesday on the 9th, and we will forward the registration to you so that you have an opportunity to view what PrimePay will be delivering to our clients, and I'll just talk about that here in a second. The last thing here is, again, in order for you to empower your clients, to enable them to drive more value, you are just sitting in a wonderful position. You truly, out of all of the advisors that I've talked to, you're sitting in the most perfect position to be able to arm your clients with the correct set of procedures and rules and guidance so that they're doing this and fulfilling their obligations correctly. So with that being said, I just have a few more things here before we wrap up. As I mentioned here, we are hosting a webinar next Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Want you to save that date and time. We are going to be announcing our new solution that will assist employers through the various ACA reporting requirements, and certainly 1094, 1095 being one of them. Our new name is the the ACA Compliance Navigator solution, so we're extremely excited about it. One thing to note, that this solution is being offered as an integrated payroll solution, meaning that data is being pushed automatically from payroll, from our payroll system, directly into that comprehensive solution on an ongoing basis, saving employer maybe about half the time because of the data is already there. But we're also offering this, and we're excited about offering it as a standalone solution as well. And so please tune in, register for the webinar, and if you're unable to attend, at least register. That way we can get you a recording of that webinar as well. What I also want to mention, actually kind of re-engage you on as well, is our current promotion that we have specifically for brokers and the clients that you refer, is that between now through the end of October, we are offering you as an agency or your clients 60 days free payroll service. So as you think about this new ACA Compliance Navigator, our new solution, what a great time to save employer more time and energy, create more efficiency, getting them on our payroll service solution to enable that data integration to occur. And they're going to save 60 days, what? All because of you, which is awesome in our relationship. The last thing what I want to mention, a lot of our Broker Concierge partners have taken us up on this offer, and we want to continue to extend it. Now more than ever, you have an opportunity to get information out to your clients. Not just give them the information, but help them through it. Provide the details. Provide that practical application. We want to help. And so for any of our Broker Concierge partners, we want to offer an exclusive client webinars, client seminars, and we can speak on these specific topics. And so whether it's through a webinar or through some seminar, we are willing to do it. In the months of September and October, great times to be talking about it as your employers are trying to fulfill, this specific obligation. So with that, that will conclude our webinar here for today. I can't thank you enough for attending. We will review the questions asked. Thank you for sending those, and we will, as I look through those, we will either attempt to create an FAQ that we will provide back to you, but also look for our follow-up email with the link to the recording, and you can view that at your own leisure. Our Broker Concierge partners will also receive exclusively the presentation slide deck, so you could use it as ongoing in your review. And so we can't thank you enough for you attending these webinars, but also for us being able to earn your business throughout the year. We look forward to the fourth quarter and in helping assist you and enabling you to, at the end of the day, helping your clients fulfill these various and very stringent ACA obligations. So with that, can't thank you enough for joining, and that will conclude our webinar.